Hello everybody, my name is Chloe. Welcome back to Chlor Stories. This is a channel where I read out my own writing, and Merry Christmas everybody. Happy holidays. It is currently December 24th, Christmas Eve. I hope you guys are having a wonderful December. Happy holidays, happy Kwanzaa, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I hope you guys are having a wonderful, wonderful time. And you know what? I just figured let's get straight into it. Let's do it. I've got a Christmas story for us tonight, so let's rock, people. Little Gabriel was laying in bed with his door cracked open. He laid there listening to the joyful sounds of his family's holiday party downstairs. His entire extended family was having fun singing, drinking, and eating. It was Christmas Eve, and he was tucked into bed a few hours ago. But what kid gets a good night's sleep today? He thought that today was the best and worst day ever. So close and so far from Christmas Day. He looked forward to jumping on his parents and older siblings. He'd wake them incredibly early, and everyone would groggily walk down the stairs. So tonight he laid in bed, his mind wide awake, but his body devastatingly tired. He went downstairs to tell his mother he couldn't sleep, and she shooed him away and told him to talk to his grandfather. "Grandpa, can you read me a story?" he said with big eyes. Can you ask somebody else to do it?" his grandpa said, and Gabriel's mother chimed in from across the room. "Dad, read your grandson a story." So now Gabriel was in bed waiting for his granddad to come into the room with a story for him. His grandpa walked in and sat in the rocking chair beside his bed. He had a leather book. "I found this one under the Christmas tree. Whose is it?" his inebriated grandpa questioned. "I don't know. I haven't seen that before," Gabriel admitted. The truth was, no one in the family had placed it there. It somehow made its way under the tree, though. The book was very thick, dark leather. It simply said, "Christmas Stories," with a small plain gingerbread under the lettering. His grandpa took some more sips of his eggnog and opened the book. Upon reading the inside title page, Gabriel and his granddad were pulled in supernaturally. They were now dependent on hearing every word that followed. His grandpa would not stop reading now that they started. How this magical or evil book got into their house was a mystery, but the stories that were kept hidden between the pages would be revealed to them both. Gabriel and his granddad were still themselves. His grandpa still taking drags from his eggnog, and Gabriel was still his usual self, but now they felt unimaginable energy to hear the whole book, so his grandpa began to read the first story. The snowy mountains that covered the sky would draw many near, far and wide, for it was here many came after this year, never again. Local legend gone untold, spirits running up Jayfold. Couldn't be here or there, is that Rudolph's angry stare? The cold wind rushed down the mountain, picking up and throwing the newly laid snow. This breeze doesn't feel inviting like it used to, Alvy thought. She could recall days as a kid when it didn't matter how cold it was. Her joy kept her warm. As did the 3 to 4 layers her mom would bundle her in. Now she was old enough to layer herself, but layers didn't get boys' attention. So she stood at the base of an iced mountain with minimal clothing. Her dad joked that if she decided to stay out skiing all day like he did, she would surely get frostbite. She got attention, but not from who she'd hoped. Christmas time at Mount St. Dixon brought many people and families, but not this close to the holiday. Now the only visitors were older couples whose families didn't want them around, which meant the attention Alvy got was from judgmental grandmothers and from the eyes of old white men who could have passed for Santa themselves. Alvy rolled her eyes for the 20th time that day as she tried to check her phone, and it refused to load. Alvy's father asked her to stay present and in the moment on the car ride up the mountain for this daddy-daughter Christmas trip. She chewed her gum and stared out the window in response. Her father had hoped the good memories of the past traditions they shared would give Alvy an opportunity to open up a little. He was a single father who worked a lot and did his best to be a good dad to his teenage daughter. Good father and all, he was a bit relieved that she didn't want to spend the whole day skiing with him. This was their vacation, but he certainly needed it more than Alvy. After all, what was she so moody and stressed out about? Boys? High school? Living a nice life? So as the breeze whipped his face, he took in deep, freezing breaths that hurt his chest, and he wondered when the last time he had felt this alive was. Alvy skied down a little ways to get to the lodge. She walked in and put her skis along with the others near the door. A large fire was lit in a brick fireplace to her left. It was surrounded by men talking and laughing about tales from their youth, many, many years ago. She rolled her eyes as one of the men did a double take to look at her. She hung her scarf and began to walk to the bar nearby to ask for a tea. She stood and waited for an employee to come out to take her drink order, but it was some time before anyone did. The lodge not only held guests, but a decent majority of the employees actually lived at the lodge as well. Many were out of town for the holiday due to the typical slowness this week would bring to the mountain. Alvy was typically a patient person, but feeling the man who sat at one of the leather armchairs' eyes was getting to be a bit too much. He laughed extra loud when he noticed her presence, unaware of his desperate attempts at getting the young woman's attention. With nothing to do but wait since her phone was essentially just a brick in her pocket, she awkwardly looked around and tapped her fingers to the tune of Here Comes Santa Claus. My brother-in-law said he actually met Gene Autry. Said the guy bought him a beer. I think he's full of shit, said the staring man. She hadn't even heard him walk up to her. It was as if he teleported. She awkwardly laughed and said, "Oh, who's Gene Autry?" "Who's Gene Autry?" he said with heartiness and genuine surprise. "Well, Gene Autry was the man who made that song famous," he said, pointing to her fingers, which had stopped tapping the moment he approached. "Oh," she said with another awkward laugh and looked anywhere but at him. That didn't stop him from looking at her, though. He stared at her perfect, smooth skin. It was white like snow and looked as soft as it, too. He thought about how her dark brown hair made her skin look that much prettier. Her young lips, still pink despite how long she had been outside. It had been 49 minutes. He made a mental note what time he noticed her outside. Her smooth-looking skin did not disappoint him, like the woman he had been married to for decades. This was new and fresh. He had been married longer than this girl had probably been alive, but that made this game just more interesting to him. He could see the veins on her neck, a bright blue that traveled further down below her neckline, where she had not worn an undershirt. Her long locks covered what he was actually interested in, not conversation about a long-dead musician. He gently and slowly moved her hair to reveal her further. He was so caught up in his fantasy, he had not noticed the young worker who had come out. The young man had noticed the strange interaction between the two, and you would have had to be dead to not see how intensely uncomfortable she was. He brought out 2 piping hot teas. Before the pervy Santa could move her hair completely off her shoulders, Damien cleared his throat. Alvy stared at him quietly, asking for help with her eyes. How you read my mind, boy, he said, snapping his fingers. Damien gave him a polite smile, closing his eyes, and went to hand the man his tea when it slipped through his fingers and sprayed all over the man. He began screaming curses at the boy, his skin feeling like it would certainly melt off. Alvy took a few steps back, then began to beeline it for the door. All the other men got up to check on their friend. Alvy grabbed her scarf and skis and took off. She arrived at the corner shop that sold thermals. She bought a shirt and leggings and proceeded to change in the changing rooms. She wasn't going to let another incident like that happen again, but she didn't feel like hiking all the way back up to her room. The rest of the day, she decided to take her dad's advice and be in the moment. She always loved the rush of flying down the mountain. Her dad taught her how to ski when she was young. They bonded over it, and even entered competitions when she got good. Never earning anything over a 4th or 5th place, but her dad was always happy and proud wherever they stood. As she dodged, jumped, and soared with wood sticks stuck to her feet, she thought about the tiny village town you could see further down the mountain. Made entirely out of wood and looked incredibly old, it was still decorated for the Christmas, much like the lodge. She wondered what kind of people lived there. She would learn her answer later, but it was an old way of life. No modern technology besides light switches and outlets. The village consisted of middle-aged or older folk, only a small handful of people younger than 40. As Alvy sat in the ski lift for the millionth time that day, she closed her eyes. She noticed how the air felt like it shifted. It felt dense, like heavily packed snow. Which made her think about how, in every interview with someone with a ghost encounter, they said, the air felt heavy and thick. Every single time without fail, you think if you knew you were going to be interviewed, maybe you'd look up some more adjectives, she thought. She listened to the sounds of trees and sounds of birds. Then she noticed another sound. Far in the distance, she could hear bells. They came in the direction of the forest. She thought it was definitely odd, and she investigated overhead to see if she could spot anything to explain them, but she couldn't. Though weird, she didn't give them much more thought. She decided this would be her last run as the lift began to turn to circle back. She lowered her goggles and hopped off. She tried to make this one count. She did various ski trips like pops, ollies, shifties, and switch skiing. She always wondered why they had such weird names. A pop was essentially just a jump, shifties were a turn in the air, and the switch skiing just meant skiing backwards. Ollies and shifties were the only ones that really made sense to her. So as she glided down the mountain performing tricks that she used to dream of doing at the Olympics, she caught the sounds of bells again. She listened close, but the wind was too loud in her already muffed ears, so when she didn't notice them again, she didn't bother stopping. She was racing closer to the end of the piste, and she gained speed for a fun, entertaining stop. She was nearing the lodge at the very base of the trails when she heard bells intensely close, and they moved extremely fast. They rushed at her, and they sounded like they flew overhead. As she continued to rush down, she ducked not to get hit by whatever she couldn't see. When she got up and looked towards the sky in the direction the noise would have left to, she turned back and saw the young man who had helped her earlier. He had a bag of trash, and they both saw each other at the last minute before they collided hard. Trash went flying. They slammed into each other so hard they would both have bruises. They laid in the snow, surrounded by garbage, for a few moments before Alvy apologized deeply, and she went over to him. She began to touch his body and asked him if anything hurt. When she reached for his ankles, he winced in pain. She pulled up his pants and saw a cut from what she assumed was her skis sliding past his skin. The other foot had a swelling bruise already. She was lucky that this was the worst of it for him. Other than that, and the other bruises, he seemed to be okay. She checked herself, and she experienced just about the same. Bad bruising and a terrible lesson learned. She helped him get up and insisted on helping him walk inside. She sat him on the steps outside the entrance to the employee door, which he would have walked out of, and she began to take her skis off. She apologized again, and he urged her that it was okay. He admitted that he'd hoped to see her again after that morning incident. He was disappointed he hadn't seen her sooner, so she could have avoided the old man completely, but he was happy to get her out of the situation, even if it meant that all those old men would not be tipping him handsomely as they were for the remainder of their trip. She thanked him for helping her, but did not apologize for leaving the lodge so quickly. Though when she was skiing, a few times she caught herself thinking about him and how handsome he was, even though she had only saw him for a brief moment. She leaned her skis in the corner of the wall in the door frame, as well as her ski boots. Her dad had a weird superstition about wearing ski boots indoors. He thought it brought terrible luck and was a possible explanation for her mother's wrongdoings. So he forced her to always leave them outside or in the garage. She had started to believe it herself, too. She left her boots on when she entered the lodge earlier that day and encountered pervy St. Nick. She shoved her socks in her pockets and walked barefoot to the young man and helped him up once again. He looked at her crazy as her toes were already turning a pink color. She laughed at his reaction and didn't bother explaining. They walked inside, and she helped him to one of the armchairs near the fireplace. The lodge had a couple people. A couple women upstairs reading together, a set of older men at the bar drinking and chatting, and a worker in the corner eating their lunch. She told him she'd be right back, and she walked in the direction they came from. She spotted a house cleaning cart and stole a trash bag, and continued outside. Barefoot still, she began cleaning up the trash that had spilled. Her feet were cold, but it was a usual feeling and didn't bother her much. As she picked up, she thought about how she should have checked to see if the cart had any gloves. She had just about picked everything up when she heard the bells again. This time they weren't trying to run her off the ski trail, but they were close. She turned around slowly and finally saw what had been making the bell sound. A reindeer, with beautiful colors. A warm hot chocolate brown, a white patch on its chest that looked as soft as whipped cream. It was the most beautiful deer that anyone ever laid their eyes on. Oh my gosh, hello, Alvy said with a sincere warmth in her heart. It had a ruby red harness that had jingle bells attached to it. It flicked its ears and huffed softly when she spoke. What are you doing out here all alone, buddy? She took a small step closer and put her hand out. This was clearly an animal that had been adjusted to people, so she didn't see the harm in gently going up to it. She took another cold step, her feet crunching the snow, and it breathed hard, and she stayed in place. The old man that gave her such trouble earlier was coming around the building corner. He was clearly intoxicated and probably had 3 too many eggnogs. He was wearing a puffy black jacket that had a large light-up necklace that looked like Christmas lights. It was rapidly blinking, and he was shouting the chorus of "Here Comes Santa Claus." He wore a Santa hat that had small bells on it. Both Alvy and the deer looked over, and when he rounded the corner, the deer became agitated. She backed up from the deer, and it began to huff intensely, and its footing starting to dance. The man didn't notice either of them and continued singing. The reindeer kicked, and its colors began to change. It was a dark brown, and its white spot was stained red with a blood color. Its skin and fur on its side was peeled back and revealed the animal's ribs. Its face shrunk in and looked much bonier. Its nose grew and glowed a light red. It raged, and it went running at the man. It used its massive antlers to pick him up and throw him. The man went flying through the air, and Alvy covered her mouth and dropped to the floor. His body slammed on the floor with a terrible noise. The reindeer went over to the man's mangled body and proceeded to use its legs to slam into it, further destroying him. Alvy kicked the snow as she began to back up. The deer ripped off his Santa hat, then his limbs with its teeth. When it was done crushing the man into tiny pieces, it let out a grunt into the air. Off in the distance, Alvy heard what she assumed was the rest of the men she saw earlier. It sounded like a large group of drunk men caroling. The reindeer whipped its head in the direction. Alvy ran to the stairs, but before she could get inside, she watched as the beast jumped in the air, defied gravity, and began flying. The bells rang out loud as it did.